Somewhere in the open Pacific, far from shipping lanes and city lights, the ocean floor drops away without warning. The water darkens, the temperature falls, and the distance to the bottom stretches beyond anything the human mind is built to picture. There is no gradual slope, just depth, and then more depth. The Mariana Trench is so deep that if you fell into it, you would sink for over an hour before reaching the bottom, and even then, you would not see it until the last moments. At its lowest point, 10,935 meters below the surface, the pressure reaches 1,086 times what you feel right now, enough to compress solid objects, collapse airspaces, and erase anything not built for it. Fewer than 25 people have ever been there. More have walked on the moon. For most of human history, this place has not been explored. It has been avoided, and that matters, because for 20 million years, a single predator dominated every ocean on Earth. Its teeth were the size of a human hand. Its bite force exceeded anything we have ever measured. And then, 3.6 million years ago, it disappeared. According to the fossil record, it is gone, but the fossil record only tells us where something has been found. It does not tell us where we have never looked. The Mariana Trench is one of those places, a region so deep, so vast, and so difficult to access that even now we have explored only fragments of it. No comprehensive search has ever been completed. No continuous observation has ever been maintained, and no method we currently use guarantees detection at that scale and depth. That is where the uncertainty begins, because if there is any environment on Earth where something large could exist without leaving clear evidence, it would look exactly like this: dark, cold, isolated, and almost completely unobserved. So the question is not simply whether something like Megalodon could still exist. It is whether we would even know if it did. If you enjoy this kind of content, a like and subscribe helps more people find it. And I'm curious, what brought you here tonight? Can't sleep, or just love this kind of thing? Let me know in the comments. Now let's go deeper. Far out in the western Pacific Ocean, beyond the familiar shipping lanes and scattered island chains, the seafloor begins to bend downward in slow geological silence. East of the Mariana Islands, the Pacific Plate has been sliding beneath the smaller Mariana Plate for tens of millions of years, descending at a pace so gradual it measures only a few centimeters each year. Human fingernails grow faster, yet across immense stretches of time, that patient movement has folded the crust of the Earth into the deepest known place on the planet, a trench so large and ancient that its dimensions resist ordinary intuition. The Mariana Trench extends for roughly 2,550 kilometers across the floor of the Pacific. At its broadest regions, it reaches nearly 70 kilometers wide. It is not a narrow crack in the seabed, nor a clean wound running through the ocean floor. The trench is a landscape. Ridges rise from darkness like drowned mountain chains. Isolated basins rest between steep escarpments. Long valleys descend into colder and heavier water, where pressure increases layer by layer, kilometer after kilometer, until the ocean itself begins to behave differently under its own weight. At the deepest confirmed point, Challenger Deep, the seafloor rests nearly 11 kilometers beneath the surface. If Mount Everest were lowered carefully into that abyss, its summit would still remain more than 2 kilometers underwater. Down there, sunlight has never existed. The water temperature lingers only a few degrees above freezing across the entire trench floor, cold enough to slow movement, metabolism, and decay into near stillness. Every surface instinct about the ocean disappears at those depths. Waves do not reach there, storms leave no trace, Even time seems altered, stretched thin beneath the weight of the water above. The first humans to encounter this place did so by accident and disbelief. In the year 1875, the crew of HMS Challenger lowered weighted rope into the Pacific while conducting one of the earliest global oceanographic expeditions. The rope kept descending. More line disappeared into the water than anyone thought possible. The readings appeared absurd, beyond what 19th century sailors considered physically believable. Yet the measurements were repeated and the impossible depth remained. The trench took its modern name from that vessel, though for decades afterward, the numbers still felt unreal, more rumor than geography. Almost a century passed before human beings reached the bottom themselves. On January 23, 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh descended inside the bathyscaphe Trieste, a steel sphere lowered slowly through black water toward the deepest point on Earth. The descent lasted nearly 5 hours. Around them, the pressure climbed to more than 1,000 times that at sea level, enough force to crush ordinary submarines instantly. When they finally touched the seafloor, their landing stirred fine sediment into thick clouds that erased most visibility outside the small viewing ports. They remained there for only 20 minutes. In that dim haze, they observed a flatfish moving across the bottom, a brief confirmation that vertebrate life could survive even there, beneath all sunlight and beyond every ordinary marine boundary. Then the trench fell silent again. The next crewed descent did not occur until the year 2012, when filmmaker James Cameron traveled alone to Challenger Deep in a specially designed submersible. Between the Trieste expedition and Cameron's descent, more than half a century passed in which the deepest known place on Earth received exactly one human visit. Entire generations lived and died, while the trench remained almost completely untouched. And before anything hidden within that darkness can be understood properly, it becomes necessary to understand the creature whose shadow still lingers above it, waiting in the cold distance between extinction and memory. Long before human beings named the oceans, before whales crossed entire hemispheres beneath moonlit water, a different shape moved through the sea with almost unimaginable authority. Its existence survives now in fragments scattered through marine sediment, triangular remnants carried ashore by tides and storms, resting unnoticed in cliffs, riverbeds, and ancient seabeds lifted slowly onto land. Most people first encounter it as a tooth held in a museum drawer or balanced in the palm of a hand, dark and mineralized with age, carrying the outline of a predator that once existed on a scale difficult for the modern world to comfortably picture. Its scientific name is Otodus megalodon. Despite the familiar silhouette, it was not simply an oversized version of the modern great white shark. The resemblance is real, but it is distant, shaped more by similar ecological roles than close ancestry. Megalodon belonged to a separate lineage, known as the Odontidae, a branch of predatory sharks that diverged from the ancestors of the great white more than 60 million years ago, when the continents still occupied subtly different positions and the oceans carried very different currents across the planet. A modern great white may reach 6 meters in length. Megalodon stretched far beyond that scale. The largest confirmed individuals are estimated at roughly 18 meters long, reconstructed from fossil teeth and enormous vertebral columns recovered from ancient sediment. Some estimates extend even farther. At that size, the animal outweighed nearly every predator known in Earth's history, reaching masses between 50 and 100 metric tons. Its body moved through the ocean with the weight of a locomotive and the silence of a shark, propelled not by sudden bursts of speed alone, but by immense muscular efficiency refined across millions of years. The teeth remain the clearest evidence of its existence. Some measure nearly 18 centimeters from root to tip, broad and serrated like industrial blades, designed not for cutting flesh cleanly, but for gripping into bone and tearing through dense tissue. A single tooth can outweigh a human hand. Yet these fossils are common, not because the animal itself was common in the fossil record, but because sharks continually replace their teeth throughout life. Rows moved endlessly forward inside the jaws, old teeth falling away into the sea by the thousands across a single lifetime. The ocean floor preserved them patiently in mud and sand, long after cartilage and soft tissue vanished. From those teeth, paleontologists reconstructed the shape of the jaws that carried them. The estimated gape reached more than 3 meters wide and nearly 3 meters tall, large enough to swallow multiple adult humans at once without resistance. Inside that mouth existed the strongest bite force ever calculated for any animal, living or extinct. Conservative estimates begin above 100,000 newtons and climb far higher. For comparison, the bite of a great white shark measures only a fraction of that pressure, while even the immense jaws of a saltwater crocodile fall dramatically below it. Megalodon did not merely wound prey, it crushed rib cages, shattered vertebrae, and removed entire sections of flesh in single movements. Additional confirmation emerged from fossil vertebrae discovered in Belgium, circular columns measuring roughly 15 centimeters across at their centers, the largest shark vertebrae ever found. They carried the scale of the animal quietly within them, confirming that the giant suggested by the teeth was real, physical, and fully biological, rather than exaggerated by imagination. And perhaps the strangest detail of all is not its size, but its duration. Megalodon existed for approximately 20 million years, from roughly 23 million years ago until about 3.6 million years ago. Across that span of time, entire mountain ranges rose and eroded away. Ocean gateways opened and closed. Species appeared, flourished, and disappeared into extinction, while this predator remained. Modern humans, by comparison, have existed for only a brief geological instant, scarcely long enough to register against the age of the oceans Megalodon once ruled. There was a time when the oceans carried far more warmth than they do now. Coastlines rested in different places, softened by higher sea levels that flooded continental shelves now exposed to air and sunlight. Wide inland seas stretched deep into continents, and shallow tropical water covered regions that today are forests, deserts, and cities. During the Miocene and early Pliocene epochs, the planet moved through a long interval of marine abundance, a world shaped less by ice and more by heat, where warm currents connected distant coastlines into a nearly continuous cradle of life. Whales flourished in that ocean with extraordinary diversity. Dozens of species crossed the seas at once, ranging from relatively small forms, only a few meters long, to giants approaching the length of modern blue whales. Some grazed slowly through nutrient-rich upwellings. Others hunted fish in dense schools beneath warm surface water. Ancient relatives of sperm whales moved through deeper offshore regions, while broad-headed baleen whales migrated between feeding grounds that no longer exist in the modern arrangement of continents and currents. Never before or since has Earth sustained such a vast range of large marine mammals simultaneously. The ocean had become a reservoir of living biomass, dense enough to support a predator, unlike anything alive today. Megalodon occupied that world completely. Fossil teeth recovered from North America, South America, Europe, Africa, India, Australia, and Japan reveal a distribution extending across nearly every major ocean basin on Earth. Only Antarctica has failed to yield confirmed remains. The pattern left behind is unmistakable. This was not an isolated species confined to one coastline or sea. It belonged to the entire planet. Warm equatorial waters, temperate continental shelves, and ancient migration corridors all carried evidence of its presence, as though the oceans themselves once shared a single apex predator moving silently between hemispheres. In several shallow coastal formations, paleontologists uncovered dense concentrations of smaller teeth mixed within protected marine sediments. Bone Valley in Florida, the Calvert Formation in Maryland, and the Gatun Formation in Panama all preserve these remarkable clusters. The teeth belonged not to adults, but to juveniles. Their sizes suggest newborn megalodons already measured between 2 and 4 meters long at birth, comparable in length to many adult sharks alive today. Even in infancy, they were fully capable hunters, entering the world already armed with serrated jaws and instinctive predatory behavior. These nursery grounds appear to have functioned much like modern shark nurseries, calm shallows where warmer water and reduced competition allowed younger animals to grow before entering open ocean ecosystems. The image that emerges is unexpectedly intimate for a creature of such scale. Far from wandering endlessly through deep offshore water, Megalodon began life in protected coastal environments, beneath sunlight and wave motion, among reefs, estuaries, and submerged plains, now buried beneath layers of sediment and time. Its hunting strategy can still be reconstructed from scars left on fossil whale bones. Unlike many predators that target soft tissue opportunistically, Megalodon appears to have attacked with precision. Bite marks cluster repeatedly around rib cages and flippers, the regions containing vital organs and the primary structures required for swimming. A damaged flipper slowed escape, crushed ribs, collapsed lungs, and destabilized movement. The attacks reveal an animal selecting anatomical weak points deliberately, applying overwhelming force where survival could be ended fastest. Ancient whale skeletons preserve these moments quietly, their healed fractures and shattered bones carrying the outline of encounters that occurred millions of years before human beings existed. And throughout that immense span of time, nothing comparable shared the oceans beside it. Other predators lived and hunted beneath those ancient waves, but none approached Megalodon in size, range, or ecological dominance. No rival occupied its position. No second giant balanced its authority across the marine food web. For millions of years, every ocean on Earth existed beneath the influence of a single predator, large enough to alter the behavior, migration, and evolution of the animals around it. Since its disappearance, the oceans have never belonged to anything in quite the same way again. In museum drawers and sediment cores around the world, there comes a point where the teeth stop appearing. Layer after layer preserves the familiar serrated triangles, buried within ancient marine deposits like scattered signatures left behind by a vanished empire. And then, within rocks dating to roughly 3.6 million years ago, the pattern changes abruptly. The fossil record does not fade gently into uncertainty. It narrows sharply and then falls silent. Across the long chronology of marine sediment, that silence becomes one of the strongest pieces of evidence modern paleontology possesses. The timing aligns with a transformation that reshaped the oceans themselves. For millions of years, a broad tropical passage once connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the region now occupied by Panama. Warm water flowed freely between basins, distributing heat across hemispheres and stabilizing marine ecosystems that had evolved under comparatively warm global conditions. Then tectonic uplift slowly raised the seafloor, narrowing the corridor grain by grain until the Central American Seaway finally closed. The consequences spread outward across the planet with extraordinary reach. Ocean circulation reorganized. Currents that had once drifted between oceans were redirected into new pathways. The Gulf Stream strengthened and carried warmer water farther north into the Atlantic, while other regions cooled. Polar ice expanded gradually, global temperatures declined. The seas Megalodon had inhabited for nearly 20 million years began to change shape, chemistry, and rhythm beneath it. Warm coastal environments contracted toward lower latitudes. Ancient shallow seas retreated from continental interiors. Whale species that once moved through tropical nursery grounds shifted migration routes or diminished in number. Some prey animals evolved toward smaller body sizes under changing ecological pressure, reducing the immense caloric return that had sustained giant marine predators for millions of years. Others disappeared entirely, leaving gaps within food webs that had remained stable across immense stretches of geological time. The same moment, new competitors emerged into prominence. Early ancestors of the modern killer whale, or Sinus orca, diversified during this cooling interval. Unlike the solitary hunting strategy reconstructed for Megalodon, these smaller predators evolved cooperative behavior, surrounding prey in coordinated groups and extracting large amounts of energy with remarkable efficiency. Intelligence, communication, and social hunting became ecological advantages in oceans where resources were becoming less predictable and more widely distributed. Great white sharks expanded alongside them, smaller, faster, and more adaptable to fluctuating temperatures. They required only a fraction of the food necessary to sustain a fully grown megalodon. Their bodies heated more efficiently during long migrations through cooler water, and their reduced size allowed them to exploit prey populations inaccessible or inefficient for a giant predator dependent on massive caloric intake. As ecological niches opened and shifted beneath changing climate patterns, these sharks moved into spaces once dominated by larger hunters. What makes the extinction pattern especially striking is its relative speed. In paleontological terms, many extinctions unfold gradually across millions of years, leaving behind long tapering declines in fossil abundance. Megalodon does not appear to follow that rhythm. The disappearance occurs within only a few 100,000 years, geologically rapid for a species that had previously persisted across epochs of planetary change. After surviving shifting coastlines, evolving prey communities, and millions of years of tectonic motion, the lineage seems to have crossed suddenly into instability. Modern statistical analysis has attempted to refine this timeline further. A study published in the journal PeerJ during the year 2019 examined the distribution of the youngest known Megalodon fossils using Bayesian modeling, a method designed to estimate extinction probability from incomplete records. The conclusion placed the species' likely disappearance at approximately 3.6 million years ago, with high confidence based on the clustering and absence of younger confirmed specimens. And so the evidence taken together forms a calm and coherent picture. The oceans cooled, food webs reorganized, competition intensified. The environments that once favored a giant warm water predator gradually vanished beneath a changing planet. In the stone record left behind beneath continents and ancient seabeds, the age of Megalodon appears to close, not with catastrophe, but with the slow turning of Earth itself. A fossil can feel permanent when held beneath museum light, heavy with mineral weight and geological age, but fossilization itself is one of the rarest events in the natural history of the Earth. Most living things vanish without leaving any durable trace behind them. Forests disappear into soil. Entire populations dissolve into scavengers, bacteria, current, and weather. The planet is filled not with preserved remains, but with absences. Paleontology works within those absences carefully. reconstructing vanished worlds from the small fraction of life that entered exactly the right conditions at exactly the right moment. For an organism to become fossilized, death alone is not enough. The remains must be buried rapidly before scavengers scatter them or oxygen-driven decay consumes them. Sediment chemistry must remain stable across immense spans of time. Mineral replacement must occur gradually within protected environments untouched by erosion, tectonic destruction, or dissolving groundwater. Even under ideal conditions, preservation is selective and incomplete. The overwhelming majority of species that have ever lived on Earth left behind no fossils at all. The ocean complicates this process further. On land, bones may rest undisturbed beneath river sediment or volcanic ash for thousands of years before mineralization begins. In the sea, movement rarely stops long enough for such quiet preservation. Currents redistribute remains constantly across continental shelves and abyssal plains. Soft tissue disappears rapidly beneath the attention of scavengers. Within only a few days of death, large marine carcasses are often reduced to bone and fragments by fish, crustaceans, worms, and microbial decay. Seawater itself slowly works against preservation, dissolving calcium phosphate over geological time through the chemistry of salt, pressure, and circulation. Sharks are especially vulnerable to disappearance because their skeletons are not made of bone. They are built primarily from cartilage, a lighter and more flexible material that allows efficient movement through water but survives poorly after death. Cartilage dissolves in the ocean within years or decades, leaving little behind. Teeth endure because they are coated in highly mineralized enamel. For Megalodon, nearly every confirmed fossil originates from these discarded teeth, not from complete skeletons resting intact beneath ancient sediment. This creates an important distinction within the fossil record itself. The evidence shows when Megalodon teeth stopped appearing in the sedimentary layers scientists have examined. It does not show the precise moment the final animal disappeared from the earth. It reveals the last preserved tooth, recovered from a location where preservation occurred successfully and where human beings later excavated the sediment containing it. That is a far narrower statement than extinction often sounds when spoken aloud. The deeper the ocean becomes, the more difficult preservation grows. Below roughly 4,000 meters, a boundary known as the carbonate compensation depth alters the chemistry of the water significantly. Cold temperature and immense pressure increase the dissolution of calcium carbonate and related minerals. Material sinking into hadal environments may dissolve gradually or vanish beneath accumulating sediment long before future coring technology could ever recover it. In such places, the geological archive grows thinner and more fragmented. Most sediment cores used to establish Megalodon's extinction timeline originate from continental shelves and upper ocean slopes, environments comparatively accessible to marine geology and rich in preserved fossils. Hadal trenches remain largely absent from this record. The floor of the Mariana Trench and similar deep ocean basins has not been systematically sampled across the relevant layers corresponding to the final appearance of Megalodon elsewhere in the world. Entire stretches of deep marine history remain physically untouched beneath kilometers of water and sediment. None of this overturns the evidence already discussed. The fossil record remains strong and persuasive within the environments that have actually been examined. The disappearance of Megalodon teeth from known sediment layers still carries significant scientific weight, but the deeper one moves into the structure of the evidence itself, the clearer another truth becomes. Fossils speak only for the places capable of preserving them and for the regions human beings have successfully reached. Beyond those boundaries, the record grows quieter, thinner, and increasingly incomplete beneath the weight of the unexplored ocean floor. Along certain volcanic slopes beneath the Indian Ocean, there are underwater caves where sunlight fades into deep cobalt blue long before reaching the rock walls inside. During the day, large fish rest there, almost motionless, suspended in darkness with slow drifting fins and pale reflective eyes. Their bodies move with an ancient kind of stillness, as though the rhythm guiding them belongs to a much older Earth. For most of human history, no one knew these animals were there at all. The coelacanth, known scientifically as Latimeria chalumnae, belongs to a lineage so old that it predates the dinosaurs by more than 200 million years. Its ancestors swam through Devonian seas roughly 400 million years ago, long before forests spread across continents or vertebrates fully established themselves on land. Unlike modern ray-finned fish, the coelacanth carries thick muscular lobed fins extending outward like primitive limbs, structures that resemble the early anatomical experiments from which terrestrial vertebrates would eventually emerge. Paleontologists studied these fossils for generations as remnants of a vanished world. By the early 20th century, the case appeared settled completely. The coelacanth's last known fossils came from rocks dating to roughly 65 million years ago, near the same extinction boundary that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs. No modern specimens existed. No sightings had been confirmed. Textbooks classified the animal as extinct with quiet certainty, another branch of ancient life closed permanently by time. Then, on December 23, 1938, a museum curator named Marjorie Courtenay Latimer walked through the docks of East London, South Africa, examining the catch brought ashore by local fishermen. Among ordinary fish and discarded bycatch, one animal drew her attention immediately. It was roughly 1.5 meters long, colored steel blue with pale markings across its body. Its fins did not resemble those of modern fish. They extended outward in thick, fleshy lobes, unlike anything she recognized from living species. Unable to identify it herself, she made careful sketches and sent them to the ichthyologist James Leonard Brierly Smith. The moment he saw the drawings, recognition arrived almost instantly. The impossible fish lying in that South African museum was a living coelacanth, an animal science believed had vanished tens of millions of years before human beings appeared. The rediscovery changed more than a single classification. It exposed a limitation within scientific certainty itself. A large vertebrate, known only from ancient stone and presumed absent from the earth for 65 million years, had continued existing quietly in deep coastal waters while entire civilizations rose and disappeared above it. The story deepened decades later. In the year 1997, researchers identified a second species, Latimeria menadoensis, living near Sulawesi in Indonesia, thousands of kilometers from the African population. The separation suggested that these fish had maintained isolated populations across distant ocean basins for immense stretches of time, surviving unnoticed through the entirety of recorded human history. Their invisibility depended largely on habitat. Coelacanths spend daylight hours resting within underwater caves between roughly 150 and 400 meters below the surface, depths beyond ordinary coastal observation and inaccessible to most traditional fishing methods. They emerge primarily at night to feed, moving slowly through dark volcanic terrain where human presence remains sparse. Their survival strategy was not speed, aggression, or abundance. It was absence. They occupied places people rarely reached, and lived in numbers small enough to escape attention for geological ages. Science eventually developed a term for organisms like this. They are called Lazarus taxa, species that disappear from the fossil record only to reappear alive after immense, apparent absences. The coelacanth became the most famous example, though not the only one. The Wollemi pine in Australia, the Chacoan peccary in South America, and several marine invertebrates followed similar patterns, surviving quietly beyond the boundaries of scientific expectation. None of this demonstrates that Megalodon survived. The coelacanth proves something narrower and more careful. It demonstrates that extinction inferred from incomplete fossil evidence can occasionally be wrong, especially in environments difficult to observe directly. More importantly, it shows that large vertebrates can remain hidden for extraordinary lengths of time when the ocean provides enough darkness, depth, and distance to shelter them from human notice. In September of 1976, a United States Navy research vessel anchored off the coast of Oahu began retrieving a sea anchor suspended deep beneath the Pacific surface. The operation was routine, one small mechanical movement among countless others performed at sea each year. But as the line emerged from the water, the crew noticed a large animal tangled within it, pale beneath the deck lights and unlike any shark formerly recognized by science at the time. The creature measured more than 4 meters long and weighed roughly 750 kilograms. Its head was dominated by an enormous mouth, wide and strangely luminous along the inner lining, bordered by hundreds of tiny hooked teeth, too small for hunting large prey. The body itself appeared soft and unfamiliar, lacking the streamlined aggression associated with most large sharks known to the public. It seemed less like a predator than something adapted for drifting silently through dark water far below ordinary observation. Scientists later named it Megachasma pelagios, the megamouth shark. Genetic analysis and anatomical study revealed that this animal represented an entirely distinct lineage of deep-water filter feeding shark, unrelated in lifestyle to the giant hunters that usually shaped human imagination. It consumed plankton and small organisms by swimming slowly with its cavernous mouth open through the depths. The species had likely existed for millions of years before human beings encountered it directly for the first time, and the discovery itself happened entirely by accident, caught not through systematic biological exploration, but within a Navy anchor line hanging beneath the Pacific. Even now, after decades of marine research and expanding deep-sea technology, fewer than 300 megamouth sharks have ever been observed worldwide. Yet evidence suggests the species is broadly distributed across multiple oceans. Large animals continue moving through Earth's waters almost entirely unseen when they inhabit regions beneath regular shipping routes, fishing activity, and coastal observation. Presence and visibility are not always the same thing in the ocean. Only months after the megamouth discovery, another assumption collapsed far deeper beneath the sea. In February of 1977, researchers from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography descended along the Galapagos Rift using the submersible Alvin while conducting geological surveys across the seafloor. Their original purpose centered on tectonic activity and volcanic structure, not biology. Then the expedition encountered something no one expected to exist. Cracks in the ocean floor released streams of superheated mineral-rich water into the surrounding darkness. Around those vents clustered dense living communities unlike any ecosystem previously documented. Giant tube worms extended upward in pale columns reaching more than 2 meters long, Enormous clams rested across the rock surface beside crabs and shrimp adapted to water hot enough to approach boiling near the vent openings. All of it existed in complete darkness, far beyond the reach of sunlight. Before that moment, biology largely operated under the assumption that nearly all life on Earth depended ultimately on photosynthesis, the conversion of sunlight into energy by plants and algae at the surface. The hydrothermal vent communities revealed another pathway entirely. Here, bacteria transformed chemical energy from the Earth itself into biological fuel through a process known as chemosynthesis. Entire ecosystems survived without sunlight, sustained instead by minerals rising from beneath the crust of the planet. The deep ocean was not merely a colder extension of the surface world. It possessed its own independent foundations for life. Then, in the year 2004, another long, familiar mystery finally entered direct observation. For centuries, sailors had described immense squid in scattered accounts, while scientists recovered severed tentacles, floating carcasses, and giant beaks from the stomachs of sperm whales. Yet no one had successfully photographed a living giant squid in its natural habitat. That changed when a baited camera system deployed near the Ogasawara Islands of Japan captured images nearly 1 kilometer beneath the surface. Architeutus ducks, the animal that inspired generations of kraken legends, appeared alive before the lens for the first time in recorded history. And taken together, these discoveries form a pattern quieter and stranger than myth. Large animals, ancient lineages, and entire ecosystems have continued existing around the world while remaining almost completely outside human awareness. Some were found by accident. Others appeared only when technology finally reached the correct depth at the correct moment. The surprises did not belong solely to the distant past. They are still happening beneath the surface even now. From orbit, the ocean appears smooth and uninterrupted, a continuous blue surface wrapped around the planet like weather and sky. Yet, beneath that surface lies a terrain more extensive than every mountain range and desert combined, most of it still unresolved in meaningful detail. Modern maps of the seafloor often create the impression of completeness, but much of what appears precise is actually approximation, inferred indirectly through distant measurement rather than direct observation. As of the most recent global assessments, only a little more than 1/5 of the ocean floor has been mapped at resolutions detailed enough to distinguish features smaller than roughly 100 meters across. The remaining majority exists as a gravitational estimate generated through satellite altimetry, a technique that measures subtle bulges and depressions in the ocean surface caused by buried seafloor mass beneath. It is useful for identifying broad geological structure, but it does not reveal fine terrain, biological movement, or objects on the scale of animals. Entire mountains can remain softened into vague contours through this method. Life disappears from it entirely. The Mariana Trench exists inside that limitation. Large portions of its length have been surveyed by sonar, but even these maps operate at scales too coarse to identify individual organisms or small groups of animals. A creature measuring 18 meters long would vanish completely within that data, indistinguishable from surrounding noise and geological texture. Even a population of such animals, if dispersed across the trench, would remain invisible to the mapping systems most commonly cited as evidence of exploration. Direct observation is slower still. Remotely operated vehicles descending toward Challenger Deep require nearly 4 hours simply to reach the bottom. Every meter downward increases pressure against hull, cable, electronics, and propulsion systems. Once on the seafloor, operational time becomes severely constrained by battery capacity, tether management, and the immense difficulty of maneuvering equipment through complete darkness beneath kilometers of water. A single dive may visually survey only hundreds of square meters before ascent becomes necessary again. Against the scale of the trench floor itself, the observed region is almost microscopic. Across all expeditions in recorded history, fewer than 300 crewed and robotic descents have reached depths below 6,000 meters anywhere in the world ocean. Combined together, the total visual coverage from those dives represents far less than 1% of the hadal seafloor. Most of the deepest parts of the planet have never been seen directly by human eyes or cameras at all. Because of these limitations, researchers often rely on quieter methods. Baited camera systems are among the most effective and affordable tools available for hadal exploration. Lowered into darkness and left motionless for hours or days, they record whatever drifts near the illuminated field surrounding the bait. Again and again, these systems have returned images of species never previously documented: unfamiliar fish, translucent crustaceans, and strange invertebrates moving through depths once assumed nearly barren. Yet each deployment observes only a small radius around the camera itself, isolated within an immense landscape beyond the edges of the frame. Environmental DNA sampling offers another approach. Tiny fragments of genetic material shed into seawater through mucus, scales, waste, or decaying tissue can be filtered and identified even when the organism itself is never seen. In shallower marine environments, this technique has revealed whale sharks, rare fish species, and marine mammals moving through regions where traditional surveys detected nothing. But comprehensive environmental DNA sampling below 6,000 meters in the Mariana Trench has never been completed across the full water column. Sound also travels differently through deep water than it does near the surface. Hydrophone arrays positioned in remote oceans have captured strange biological calls for decades before identifying their source. A repeating sound, once known only as the bioduck, remained unexplained until researchers finally linked it to a species of minke whale in the Southern Ocean during the year 2014. The acoustic environment of the hadal zone remains only partially cataloged, filled with noises whose origins are still uncertain beneath layers of geological echo and distance. And so the trench persists as one of the least examined environments on Earth. It stretches for thousands of kilometers beneath the Pacific. Human beings have observed only a minute fraction of its floor directly. Most of its water column has never been sampled genetically. Its acoustic landscape remains incomplete. The deepest regions of the ocean have not been searched comprehensively. They have only been visited briefly, in scattered moments, before the darkness closed again around the departing lights. At first glance, the biological objection appears straightforward. Everything known about Megalodon points toward a predator, shaped by warm coastal seas, rich with whales, and broad continental shelves filled with migrating prey. The Mariana Trench offers none of those conditions. It is cold, lightless, and crushingly deep, separated from surface ecosystems by kilometers of water and pressure beyond ordinary vertebrate tolerance. Measured against the animal reconstructed from the fossil record, the trench seems entirely incompatible. But evolution does not preserve species in perfect stillness across millions of years. It changes them gradually, generation after generation, through selection pressures, often invisible while they are happening. The more precise question is not whether the trench could support the exact megalodon that hunted Miocene whales near ancient coastlines. The question is, what might emerge from a lineage exposed to millions of years of isolation inside an environment radically different from the one in which it began. 3.6 million years is an immense span for biological transformation. Based on estimated reproductive cycles comparable to those of modern great white sharks, that interval could represent roughly 180,000 generations. For comparison, modern humans and chimpanzees diverged from a common ancestor approximately 6 million years ago, across fewer than 240,000 human generations. The resulting anatomical, neurological, and behavioral differences between the two species became profound. Evolution operating over geological time rarely leaves lineages unchanged. The ocean already contains examples of sharks adapted to conditions that would appear impossible from a surface perspective. The Greenland shark moves through Arctic water colder than the freezing point of fresh water, descending to depths exceeding 2,000 meters, while maintaining one of the slowest metabolic rates known among large vertebrate predators. Some individuals live for centuries. Radiocarbon dating suggests lifespans extending beyond 270 years. Their bodies conserve energy with extraordinary efficiency, drifting through cold darkness at speeds scarcely faster than a slow human walk. Such adaptations emerge naturally in environments where food is sparse and energy conservation becomes more valuable than speed. The deep sea repeatedly shapes organisms toward slower movement, delayed growth, and reduced metabolic demand. Sometimes it also reshapes body size itself. In resource-limited ecosystems, large animals frequently evolve toward smaller forms over many generations, lowering caloric requirements while retaining ecological function. Similar patterns appear on isolated islands throughout the fossil record. Ancient elephants, hippos, and deer, confined to restricted habitats, evolved into drastically reduced descendants within relatively short geological periods. A lineage descending from Megalodon under deep-sea conditions could theoretically undergo comparable reduction. If body mass declined to only a fraction of the original species across millions of years, the resulting animal might remain substantial by modern standards while demanding far less energy than its ancestor. A predator measuring 5 or 6 meters long would still exceed the size of many modern sharks, yet its caloric needs would fall dramatically below those of a creature approaching the dimensions reconstructed from Miocene fossils. Pressure itself also shapes adaptation at the cellular level. Deep-sea organisms synthesize molecules such as trimethylamine oxide, often abbreviated as TMAO, which stabilize proteins against the crushing effects of extreme depth. In many fish species, TMAO concentration rises steadily with increasing habitat depth, functioning almost like a biochemical counterweight against pressure. Sharks are not excluded from this pattern. The Portuguese dogfish already inhabits depths approaching 4,000 meters in cold water only a few degrees above freezing, demonstrating that shark physiology is not inherently limited to shallow tropical seas. None of these observations demonstrate survival. They do not erase the fossil evidence or overturn the ecological arguments already discussed, but they narrow the certainty surrounding impossibility. The trench does not resemble the world Megalodon once ruled, yet the history of life repeatedly shows that lineages subjected to isolation, scarcity, and extreme environments can become almost unrecognizable from their ancestors. Over millions of years, biology has a way of moving slowly, beyond the boundaries that initially appear fixed, reshaping creatures not through sudden transformation, but through the patient accumulation of countless small survivals in the dark. Far beneath the surface, food arrives slowly. Nothing grows in the hadal zone through sunlight, and almost all usable energy begins its journey, thousands of meters above, drifting downward through the water column in fragments so small they resemble underwater snowfall. Marine snow, as oceanographers call it, is made from dead plankton, microscopic waste, dissolving tissue, fecal pellets, and thin clouds of organic debris sinking endlessly from the illuminated surface world. Across the trench floor, this material settles continuously into sediment, feeding bacteria, worms, amphipods, and countless other scavengers adapted to survival on scarcity. For small organisms, this slow rain is enough. For something approaching the size reconstructed for Megalodon, it appears catastrophically insufficient. The caloric problem remains the strongest scientific objection to any survival scenario involving a large descendant lineage. A predator weighing between 50 and 100 metric tons would require extraordinary amounts of energy simply to remain alive. Estimates derived from modern great white shark metabolism suggest that an animal of that mass could demand somewhere between 80,000 and 130,000 calories each day merely to sustain basal physiological function. Hunting activity, migration, or reproduction would raise that requirement further still. Nothing currently documented within the hadal zone seems capable of supporting such consumption rates continuously. The trench does not contain dense schools of large fish or abundant marine mammals moving through permanent darkness. Energy is thinly distributed. Most life survives by reducing movement, conserving metabolism, and feeding opportunistically whenever material drifts downward from the distant surface. Yet, sharks occupy a peculiar place among vertebrates because their metabolisms are unusually flexible. Modern great white sharks have been documented enduring long periods between major feeding events, sustaining themselves through physiological suppression that slows energy expenditure dramatically. A single large meal may support them for weeks or even months, depending on environmental conditions. Their biology is not built around constant consumption, but around endurance punctuated by rare abundance. The deep sea itself occasionally produces such abundance in startling concentrations. When a large whale dies in open water, its body eventually sinks toward the seafloor, carrying immense stores of organic material into the darkness below. These whale falls become entire ecosystems. Scavengers converge gradually from surrounding regions. Hagfish, amphipods, sleeper sharks, worms, and bacterial colonies consume the carcass in overlapping stages that may continue for decades. A single blue whale descending into the deep ocean delivers hundreds of thousands of kilograms of tissue and bone to an environment otherwise defined by nutritional scarcity. Whale falls have already been documented in hadal environments, including regions approaching trench depth. In the stillness below, one carcass becomes a long-lasting island of concentrated energy surrounded by vast, low-density terrain. Entire communities organize themselves around these events, surviving from the slow release of nutrients across years of decomposition. For a full-sized megalodon, even these resources may remain insufficient. A predator approaching the dimensions reconstructed from Miocene fossils would require repeated access to enormous food sources difficult to reconcile with the sparse ecology currently observed at extreme depth. This limitation remains real and scientifically serious. But the arithmetic changes considerably if the lineage itself changes. A descendant, reduced in size, and adapted to cold, deep water metabolism would exist under entirely different energetic constraints. A shark measuring roughly 5 or 6 meters long, operating more like a Greenland shark than a fast-moving pelagic hunter, could survive on only a small fraction of the calories required by its ancestor. Estimates for such an animal range between 1,000 and 3,000 calories daily, an amount supportable through combinations of scavenging behavior, amphipod concentrations, small fish populations, and intermittent whale falls descending from above. In that context, the hadal zone begins to appear less biologically empty than surface intuition suggests. It is not rich in the way coral reefs or coastal ecosystems are rich, but it is not sterile either. Energy still enters the trench continuously through drifting organic matter, sinking carcasses, and microbial recycling operating across immense spans of time. Life persists there by slowing itself to match the pace of scarcity. None of this resolves the question entirely. The caloric barrier remains formidable for any giant predator resembling the Megalodon reconstructed from fossils. But for a smaller, colder, metabolically restrained descendant shaped by millions of years beneath the surface, the mathematics no longer close the door as completely as they first appear to from above the water. The strongest argument against survival is not geological or physiological. It is silence. If a descendant of Megalodon existed anywhere in the modern ocean, many people assume the evidence would already surround us. Massive bite marks on whales, strange encounters from fishing crews, unexplained sonar returns moving through the dark beneath ships, some visible interruption in the ordinary patterns of the sea. A creature large enough to descend from the greatest shark in Earth's history seems as though it should leave unmistakable traces behind it. And yet the ocean has a peculiar way of absorbing evidence before human beings ever reach it. No confirmed whale carcasses bearing Megalodon scale bite patterns have been documented in modern waters. This absence matters. Paleontologists know what Megalodon feeding damage looked like in the fossil record: shattered ribs, concentrated trauma around flippers, and enormous serrated gouges embedded in ancient bone. Nothing comparable has been conclusively identified on modern whale remains. Any serious discussion of survival has to acknowledge that clearly rather than avoid it. But whale deaths themselves are rarely observed directly. Most whales die far from shore, and most do not remain floating long enough for humans to encounter them. After death, gases accumulating within the body may temporarily keep the carcass near the surface, but decomposition and scavenging eventually cause it to sink. Once descending into deep water, it becomes almost impossible to track. There is no global system monitoring sinking whale carcasses across the open ocean. Most disappear unexamined into darkness beneath shipping lanes and storms. At hadal depth, decomposition accelerates through scavenger activity. Amphipods, sleeper sharks, hagfish, and microbial colonies consume soft tissue rapidly once a carcass reaches the seafloor. Within weeks or months, little recognizable material remains beyond bone and dispersed fragments. If feeding damage occurred before the descent, retrieval becomes extraordinarily unlikely. The event vanishes into sediment and scavenging long before any expedition arrives nearby. Sonar introduces similar complications. Naval vessels and research institutions constantly map portions of the ocean using acoustic systems, but most of this monitoring occurs in comparatively shallow regions of the water column where submarines operate. Fisheries concentrate and biological traffic is highest. The hadal zone presents a far more difficult environment acoustically. Pressure alters sound behavior, geological echoes distort interpretation. Survey density falls dramatically below roughly 2,000 meters because very little human activity exists there to justify continuous monitoring. Biological sonar contacts are therefore concentrated overwhelmingly in upper ocean layers. The deepest parts of the trench receive only fragmented acoustic attention, usually associated with temporary scientific missions rather than permanent surveillance. Unknown moving objects at extreme depth are more likely to disappear into noise and uncertainty than become publicly cataloged discoveries. Fishing activity offers even less opportunity for contact. Modern commercial fisheries rarely deploy equipment deeper than roughly 2,500 meters. Beyond that range, pressure, cable weight, operational cost, and mechanical strain become prohibitive. The hadal zone begins thousands of meters below even those limits. A creature living entirely beneath 6,000 meters would occupy a biological region almost completely disconnected from industrial fishing operations. Nets, hooks, trawls, and long lines simply do not reach those depths in any systematic way. Over millions of years, a deep, adapted lineage might also lose any evolutionary reason to approach the surface at all. Surface waters would represent instability rather than opportunity. Warmer temperatures, brighter conditions, unfamiliar predators, and pressure shifts far outside the environment, shaping the lineage across geological time. Natural selection would favor individuals remaining within the stable, cold darkness where survival already worked. Thermal boundaries, behavioral conditioning, and cellular pressure adaptations could gradually isolate such organisms from upper ocean ecosystems almost completely. In environments that human beings monitor continuously, silence becomes persuasive evidence. Forests crossed daily by cameras, roads, aircraft, and satellite imaging leave little room for large unknown vertebrates to persist undetected. The hadal zone is different. It remains one of the least observed environments on the planet, surveyed intermittently, sampled incompletely, and physically inaccessible to ordinary human activity. In such a place, the absence of evidence still carries weight, but it carries it more softly, shaped always by the immense darkness surrounding the small areas we have actually seen. Sometimes uncertainty survives not as a grand mystery, but as a small, unresolved detail buried quietly inside technical literature. A footnote, a disputed measurement, a paper challenged but never fully erased. Science often advances through these narrow spaces, where evidence resists fitting perfectly into the larger structure surrounding it. Most eventually disappear beneath better data and stronger methods. A few remain suspended for decades, unresolved not because they overturn existing understanding, but because no one has closed them completely. In the year 1959, a researcher named W. Chernesky published a paper examining several Megalodon teeth recovered from deep Pacific sediment cores. These teeth were not collected from shallow coastal formations associated with the standard fossil record. They originated from deep ocean environments where accumulation occurs slowly and differently beneath immense pressure and low temperature. To estimate how long the teeth had rested on the seafloor, the study relied on manganese accretion, the gradual buildup of manganese-rich crusts on exposed objects over time. The principle itself was straightforward. Objects lying on the deep ocean floor slowly acquire mineral coatings through chemical precipitation from seawater. By estimating the growth rate of these crusts, researchers attempted to infer how long an object had remained exposed before burial. According to the measurements reported in the study, 2 Megalodon teeth displayed accretion patterns suggesting exposure times of roughly 11,000 and 24,000 years rather than millions. If those estimates were accurate, the implications would have been extraordinary. They would place living Megalodon within the span of human prehistory, long after the extinction date supported by the conventional fossil record. But almost immediately, problems emerged surrounding the reliability of the method itself. Manganese accretion rates are not fixed like the ticking of a clock. They vary across ocean regions, water chemistry, sediment conditions, current flow, and local geology. Even slight inaccuracies in assumed growth rates can produce enormous differences once projected backward across geological time. Many researchers argued that the technique simply lacked the precision necessary for dating isolated teeth reliably, especially in deep marine environments where conditions fluctuate subtly over long intervals. As a result, the findings never entered mainstream paleontology as accepted evidence against extinction. They remained controversial, cited occasionally but treated with caution by most researchers. Yet they were not entirely forgotten either. Decades later, in the year 2015, another analysis revisited similar deep-sea Megalodon specimens using updated accretion models and more refined assumptions about manganese deposition. Once again, several teeth produced anomalous results inconsistent with exposure times of 3.6 million years. The exact numbers remained debated, but the broader issue persisted quietly beneath the literature. Certain deep ocean specimens appeared younger than expected under at least some interpretations of the available data. Criticism followed again. Researchers opposing the conclusions argued that the revised models still relied on uncertain assumptions and that contamination, sediment movement, or irregular crust formation could distort the measurements substantially. Supporters countered that the anomalies deserved more careful examination rather than outright dismissal. Papers were published. Rebuttals appeared afterward. Neither side produced a definitive resolution capable of fully settling the issue. Importantly, none of this constitutes evidence that Megalodon survives. No living animal emerged from these studies. No modern tissue, DNA, or verified specimen accompanied the disputed dates. The standard extinction timeline remains overwhelmingly supported by the broader fossil record and by the ecological arguments surrounding climatic change. But the contested teeth endure as an unresolved scientific loose end. They occupy an uncomfortable space between anomaly and explanation, neither strong enough to overturn consensus nor weak enough to vanish entirely from discussion. In most environments, such ambiguity would likely carry little significance. A handful of disputed specimens against an otherwise consistent extinction record would remain a minor curiosity inside paleontology. Yet the context surrounding these teeth changes their emotional weight slightly. They originate from the deep Pacific, among the least sampled environments on Earth, recovered from regions where preservation behaves differently and direct observation remains rare. Within a world already shaped by incomplete exploration, unresolved data acquires a different texture, not proof, not revelation, only a small fracture in certainty that has never been sealed completely beneath the pressure of the ocean above it. Far below the arguments, the speculation, and the unresolved edges of the fossil record, the trench continues with the patient work of being alive. The seafloor at hadal depth is not empty rock lying beneath a dead ocean. It is inhabited continuously, densely in some regions, by organisms shaped over immense stretches of evolutionary time into forms almost unrecognizable beside surface life. Every descent into the trench has revealed not silence, but biology already waiting there. In the year 2023, researchers filmed the deepest confirmed fish ever recorded. It moved at a depth of roughly 8,336 meters beneath the surface, within darkness so complete that sunlight has never touched it at any point in Earth's history. The animal belonged to a species known as Pseudoliparus belyaevi, the hadal snailfish. It was small, translucent, and almost delicate in appearance, measuring only around 30 centimeters long. Its body lacked scales. Its bones were partially unfused, especially within the skull, allowing the structure to flex slightly beneath pressure rather than fracture. Instead of resisting the crushing weight of the water directly, the animal survives partly by yielding to it. Its movement through the trench is guided by sensory systems tuned to disturbances almost imperceptible elsewhere in the ocean. Along the sides of its body runs a lateral line capable of detecting minute changes in pressure and water displacement, allowing the fish to navigate darkness without reliance on vision. At depths where eyes become nearly useless, the surrounding water itself becomes a form of touch. Across the sediment surrounding Challenger Deep, amphipods dominate much of the visible animal life. These crustaceans resemble pale, elongated shrimp, though some species growing within the trench reach sizes difficult to associate with shallow water relatives. Certain hadal amphipods exceed 30 centimeters in length, examples of deep-sea gigantism emerging within an environment defined by cold temperatures, slow metabolisms, and scarce but concentrated nutrient opportunities. In portions of the trench floor, they exist in densities numbering thousands within a single square meter of sediment, moving constantly through the marine snow, drifting downward from the world above. Buried among them are organisms stranger still. Xenophyophores, technically giant single-celled foraminifera, spread across the sediment like living geological formations. Some grow to nearly 20 centimeters across, making them among the largest individual cells ever documented on Earth. Their fragile bodies collect fine particles from the surrounding sediment, trapping organic material and reshaping the chemistry of the seafloor around them. Entire microbial communities gather within and beneath these structures, turning a single enormous cell into a foundation for broader ecological activity. Sea cucumbers, or holothurians, drift slowly across portions of the trench floor in pale aggregations. In some surveyed regions, they account for more than 90% of the visible biomass. Their bodies pulse gently through the sediment, ingesting thin layers of organic material deposited over time from above. There is no urgency in their movement. Energy arrives slowly at hadal depth, and life there unfolds according to the same restrained rhythm. Threaded through this landscape are polychaete worms, copepods, and sediment-dwelling foraminifera constructing protective shells from surrounding particles. Microbial films spread invisibly through the mud. Tiny scavengers consume what larger organisms leave behind. Nothing is wasted. The trench supports a complete ecosystem operating under pressures that would collapse the organs of most surface creatures almost instantly. What emerges from expedition after expedition is not a finished catalog, but a pattern of continual revision. Nearly every serious descent returns with organisms never documented before, species carrying anatomical solutions unlike those found anywhere else in the ocean. Researchers studying the Mariana Trench rarely describe it as fully known because the evidence does not permit that language. The inventory remains unfinished, not in some abstract philosophical sense, but in the direct biological reality that new forms of life continue appearing each time human beings lower cameras into the dark water and wait to see what moves there already. The obstacle is no longer imagination. Human beings already possess enough scientific understanding to describe in broad outline what a definitive survey of the Mariana Trench would require. The difficulty is scale. The trench is simply too large, too deep, and too technically hostile for casual exploration to resolve a question of biological absence with confidence. To close the possibility fully would demand something closer to a planetary science mission than a conventional oceanographic expedition. A complete survey would begin not with cameras, but with water itself. Every organism moving through the ocean leaves behind fragments of genetic material, microscopic traces of skin, mucus, waste, blood, or decomposing tissue suspended invisibly in the surrounding sea. Environmental DNA sampling, usually shortened to eDNA, allows researchers to filter seawater and identify what species have recently passed through an area without ever observing the organisms directly. In shallow marine environments, this technique has already detected whale sharks, rare fish populations, and elusive cetaceans that traditional surveys missed entirely. Applied comprehensively to the Mariana Trench, such a program would require water collection at intervals of roughly 500 meters from the surface to hadal depth across the trench's entire length and width. Thousands of samples would need filtration, preservation, sequencing, and cross-comparison. Hundreds of dedicated dives would be necessary simply to gather the material. No such survey has been conducted. Acoustic monitoring would demand similar patience. Hydrophone arrays placed along the trench floor for continuous periods of at least a year could establish a baseline catalog of hadal sound production, distinguishing geological noise from biological activity. At present, much of the trench remains acoustically undocumented. Sounds recorded there exist mostly as isolated fragments gathered during temporary missions rather than continuous listening. Building a meaningful biological profile of the deep ocean would require months of uninterrupted recording beneath pressures capable of crushing most equipment ever built. The seafloor itself would also need mapping at far greater resolution than currently exists. Modern multi-beam sonar systems mounted on autonomous underwater vehicles are technically capable of producing maps detailed enough to resolve objects approximately 1 meter across. Such technology already exists in limited form, but covering the full trench floor at that fidelity would require enormous operational time, fleets of deep, capable autonomous systems, and sustained funding over many years. Most current trench maps remain comparatively coarse, useful for geological structure, but insufficient for detecting smaller biological features. Visual confirmation would be slower still. Remotely operated vehicles descending toward Challenger Deep require hours simply to reach the seafloor. Once there, battery limits, tether constraints, and weather conditions restrict operational windows severely. A systematic, visual transect survey of the trench would likely require somewhere between 500 and 1,000 separate dives under present technological conditions. Each mission would observe only a tiny fraction of the total environment before ascending again into daylight. Sediment coring would add another layer of complexity. To examine the hadal fossil record properly, researchers would need cores extracted regularly across the trench floor, sampling deposits corresponding to the period surrounding Megalodon's extinction. Such work is technically feasible, but extraordinarily expensive and logistically difficult at extreme depth. Taken together, a genuinely comprehensive survey program would likely cost between $3 and $8 billion, spread across perhaps 10 to 15 years of continuous international effort. The comparison most oceanographers quietly make is not to ordinary marine biology funding, but to a mid-scale planetary exploration mission. And this is where the problem becomes less scientific than civilizational. The annual budget for the Office of Ocean Exploration within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration sits at roughly $42 million. By contrast, the yearly budget allocated to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration exceeds $25 billion. Humanity currently spends hundreds of times more exploring other planets than examining the deepest regions of its own ocean. None of this means the trench conceals Megalodon. It means something narrower and more concrete. The survey capable of answering the question with real comprehensiveness has never been funded, never organized at full scale, and never treated as an urgent scientific priority. The possibility is considered closed already, and so the search required to close it completely has remained largely hypothetical, existing mostly on paper while the trench itself continues waiting below in darkness, unsurveyed across most of its immense length. At the institutional level, the position is clear. Megalodon is considered extinct. This conclusion is reflected across mainstream marine biology, vertebrate paleontology, and the published scientific literature. Museums present the species in the past tense. Research papers discuss its extinction as an established event in Earth's ecological history. The Society of Vertebrate Paleontology recognizes no credible evidence supporting modern survival, and among working marine scientists, the consensus itself is not controversial. That consensus rests on several foundations layered together over decades of research. The fossil record shows Megalodon teeth disappearing from datable sediment layers approximately 3.6 million years ago. The climatic and ecological changes occurring during that period align closely with the collapse of the warm, shallow ecosystems the species depended upon. Modern oceans contain no confirmed specimens, no verified tissue, no authenticated photographs, and no biological material demonstrating survival. Taken collectively, the evidence strongly supports extinction. Most scientists stop there because, in practical terms, the case appears sufficient. Yet beneath the certainty often presented publicly, there exists a quieter layer of scientific language shaped more carefully around what the evidence actually demonstrates. The distinction is subtle but real. Researchers familiar with the limitations of deep ocean exploration tend to phrase their conclusions differently when speaking with precision rather than brevity. The fossil evidence does not come from the hadal zone. The sediment layers used to establish the extinction timeline were collected primarily from continental shelves and slopes where preservation and sampling are more accessible. The hadal trench system itself remains sparsely cored and incompletely studied. Scientists acknowledge this openly within technical discussions because it reflects a straightforward reality of oceanographic sampling rather than a controversial claim. Marine biologist and shark researcher David Schiffman has stated publicly that the argument against Megalodon survival rests upon the absence of evidence rather than direct evidence proving impossibility. The wording matters. Saying there is no evidence supporting survival is scientifically accurate. Claiming comprehensive confirmation of absence requires a degree of environmental search coverage that the hadal zone has never received. This distinction rarely survives popular retelling because public communication often compresses uncertainty for simplicity. Scientific nuance tends to disappear once translated into headlines, documentaries, and short explanations designed for broad audiences. The resulting message becomes firmer than the evidence itself strictly permits, not because researchers are concealing information, but because ordinary communication favors certainty over epistemological precision. Among deep-sea researchers especially, a different tone frequently emerges when discussing hadal biology in general. Interviews with oceanographers and trench specialists often carry repeated acknowledgments that the deepest regions of Earth remain undersampled, undermonitored, and routinely capable of biological surprise. New species appear regularly from limited expeditions. Acoustic environments remain incompletely catalogued. Sediment ecosystems continue revealing unexpected complexity. In nearly every other context, researchers treat the hadal zone as a domain where strong absence claims require caution. Applying absolute confidence to a specific biological absence inside that same environment creates a subtle inconsistency in scientific framing. The trench is simultaneously described as one of the least explored ecosystems on Earth and as a place where certain conclusions are communicated with unusual certainty. Careful researchers recognize this tension even while fully accepting extinction as the overwhelmingly likely outcome. Importantly, this does not represent an active scientific debate over whether Megalodon survives. No meaningful faction within mainstream biology argues that living Megalodon populations exist beneath the Pacific. The consensus remains firmly against survival based on all currently available evidence. But there remains a small distance between what the evidence strongly suggests and what it conclusively demonstrates. That distance exists not because of hidden discoveries or suppressed data, but because the deep ocean itself has not been searched with anything approaching completeness. Science, at its most careful, tends to acknowledge such boundaries quietly rather than erase them entirely. At the edge of the map, certainty becomes softer around the margins, not absent, not overturned, but shaped by the recognition that the environment beneath discussion remains only partially seen, and that conclusions drawn from incomplete exploration always carry, somewhere within them, a trace of the darkness still left unvisited below. The trench does not need to conceal Megalodon to remain scientifically unfinished. Even without ancient sharks lingering in darkness, deep-sea biology already predicts the existence of organisms that have never been directly observed at full hadal depth. The unknown spaces below the Pacific are not empty gaps waiting only for imagination. They are environments where theory regularly moves ahead of confirmation, where ecosystems imply the presence of animals that cameras have not yet captured clearly. Among deep-sea researchers, there is broad expectation that large scavenging or predatory organisms should exist deeper than most documented observations currently reach. Dense amphipod populations, recurring whale falls, and complex trench ecosystems represent concentrated energy sources capable of supporting larger mobile consumers. Ecological systems rarely stop neatly at the smallest available body size. Somewhere beyond the edges of present observation, biology likely continues upward into forms still unrecorded directly by human instruments. The deep ocean already offers examples of how incomplete observation can distort our sense of abundance. The colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, may reach lengths approaching 14 meters and possesses the largest eyes known in the animal kingdom. Yet, despite its enormous size, it remains one of the least observed large animals on Earth. Most scientific knowledge about the species comes not from direct encounters, but from fragments recovered indirectly. Beaks extracted from sperm whale stomachs, damaged tissue caught accidentally in fishing equipment, and carcasses drifting upward after death. Alive in its natural environment, the colossal squid has been documented only a handful of times, and yet no marine biologist seriously doubts that it exists in substantial numbers across the Southern Ocean. Its apparent rarity is not biological absence. It is observational limitation shaped by depth, remoteness, and darkness. Sperm whales, deepen this uncertainty further. These animals descend routinely into depths exceeding 2,000 meters, while hunting squid beneath the surface world, visible to human beings. Some recorded dives approach 3,000 meters. What exactly they pursue during these descents remains incompletely catalogued. Their stomach contents have repeatedly revealed species unknown to science prior to discovery within the whale itself. In certain cases, marine biology learned of an organism's existence first through partially digested remains retrieved from another predator. The deep ocean often announces its inhabitants indirectly long before direct observation becomes possible. Even sound within the Pacific carries unresolved traces of this incompleteness. In the late 1990s, hydrophone arrays operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded an immense low-frequency sound spreading across multiple listening stations in the southern Pacific. The signal became informally known as the bloop. Its acoustic profile resembled biological production in some respects, though its amplitude exceeded expectations for known marine animals. Subsequent analysis suggested the sound was most likely geological, perhaps originating from ice movement or underwater tectonic activity. That interpretation remains the current position favored by researchers. Yet the signal was never resolved with total certainty, and its legacy persists, partly because it illustrated how little of the deep ocean's acoustic environment had been systematically catalogued at the time. The Pacific was speaking constantly beneath human hearing, and scientists were only beginning to learn which voices belonged to geology and which belonged to life. Meanwhile, entirely new shark species continue entering the scientific record even in the present century. The ninja lantern shark was formally described in 2015. The American pocket shark followed in 2019. Genie's dogfish entered classification during the same year. None of these animals evolved recently. Each had already existed for immense stretches of evolutionary time before human beings documented them formally. The pace of discovery has not slowed. Every year, marine biology continues adding species to a catalog once assumed far closer to completion than it truly was. In this context, the trench becomes less a singular mystery and more a reminder of scale. The hadal zone is not important because it may contain one famous predator from the distant past. It matters because it remains one of the few places on Earth where science openly expects undiscovered life to exist already. Moving quietly through darkness, beyond the range of ordinary observation, while the surface world continues largely unaware above it. Long after the scientific arguments settle into consensus, certain questions continue living in the imagination with unusual persistence. The Megalodon question belongs to that category. It survives not because the evidence strongly supports survival, but because the idea itself connects to something older and deeper than paleontology. Beneath the discussion about fossils and trenches lies a quieter psychological structure, shaping why the possibility continues to feel strangely difficult to close completely. Megalodon occupies a particular symbolic space within the human mind. It represents a version of the natural world larger than the present one, a time when oceans contained predators more immense than anything swimming through them now. Modern ecosystems still feel powerful, but Megalodon suggests an Earth once operating at a scale beyond contemporary experience. Its extinction leaves behind the impression of inheritance, as though humanity arrived late to a diminished ocean carrying only the echo of something greater that existed before us. This feeling is not unique to Megalodon. Human cultures have always filled unseen water with oversized life because the ocean itself encourages that instinct. For most of history, the deep sea existed as a genuine unknown extending beyond direct observation. Ancient sailors understood coastlines and currents reasonably well, but beyond a certain depth and distance, certainty disappeared beneath the surface. Medieval maps often illustrated sea monsters emerging from blank stretches of ocean, not merely as decoration, but as an honest acknowledgement that the territory remained unresolved. The kraken, the leviathan, and the great sea serpent all emerged from this relationship between imagination and incomplete knowledge. Cultures separated by geography arrived repeatedly at similar ideas because the underlying condition remained the same. Human beings could see the ocean, they depended upon it, they crossed it reluctantly, but they could not see into it. The darkness beneath ships became a natural space for projection, speculation, and myth, because it represented one of the few environments large enough to conceal things entirely from human control. The Mariana Trench inherits this psychological weight more strongly than any other place on Earth because it remains the most extreme continuation of that ancient invisibility. Even in the modern era of satellites and digital mapping, the trench still exists largely outside ordinary human reach. It is not abstract mystery. It is a physical place on our planet that remains difficult to access, incompletely surveyed, and biologically unfinished. The map still fades there. There is, in that sense, something intellectually honest about the public hesitation surrounding absolute certainty. The intuition that the deep ocean is not fully known is correct. The recognition that hadal biology should be discussed with caution rather than total confidence is also correct. Over and over again, the trench has demonstrated that assumptions about emptiness, impossibility, or biological limitation often dissolve once cameras descend farther than before. The mistake emerges not from those intuitions themselves, but from the conclusions sometimes drawn from them. Acknowledging uncertainty within an environment does not automatically make every possibility equally plausible. The existence of unknown species in the trench does not meaningfully increase the likelihood that a gigantic prehistoric shark survives unchanged beneath the Pacific. Scientific caution and imaginative speculation are related impulses, but they are not identical. Still, the persistence of the question reveals something important about the relationship between human beings and the natural world. Even now, in an age defined by satellites, genome sequencing, and machine learning, there remains a deep emotional recognition that parts of Earth exceed our direct understanding. The trench becomes a symbol for that unfinishedness, not necessarily because it hides a monster, but because it remains one of the last places where the possibility of hidden things still feels structurally believable. Understanding why the question endures changes the question itself. It becomes less about whether Megalodon waits beneath the Pacific and more about the human response to environments that remain partially beyond sight. The trench matters psychologically because it preserves a condition increasingly rare in modern life, the experience of standing beside something real, immense, and only partly known, while recognizing honestly that the darkness beyond the edge of observation still belongs more to the planet than to us. Long before human beings entered the oceans with ships, sonar, and steel cables, the balance of marine life had already been shaped by predators operating at scales almost difficult to imagine now. Megalodon existed not merely as a large shark, but as the controlling pressure above every major food chain across the planet's seas. For approximately 20 million years, nearly every whale migration, every coastal nursery, and every concentration of large marine biomass unfolded beneath the possibility of encountering it. Then, within a geologically brief interval, that pressure disappeared. Modern ecology has repeatedly shown that apex predators alter ecosystems far beyond the direct act of predation. Their presence changes movement patterns, breeding behavior, feeding territory, and population density across entire landscapes. In Yellowstone National Park, the removal of wolves disrupted elk behavior so thoroughly that riverbanks eroded differently. Vegetation collapsed in certain valleys, and waterways subtly changed course over time. In coral reef systems, the decline of shark populations destabilizes fish communities within years, allowing prey species to multiply unevenly until the structure of the ecosystem itself begins to distort. The disappearance of Megalodon occurred on a far larger scale than any modern example. It was not the loss of a regional predator, confined to one coastline or basin. Fossil evidence places Megalodon in nearly every major ocean on Earth simultaneously. Its extinction removed the dominant predatory force from the entire marine planet at once. No comparable event exists within documented ocean history. The sea did not simply lose a species. It lost a governing pressure that had shaped marine evolution since long before humanity existed. Whales appear to carry some of the clearest signatures of that absence. During Megalodon's reign, many whale species remained relatively modest in size compared with the giants that would later emerge. Large whales certainly existed, but the ecological environment imposed limits. To grow enormous in an ocean ruled by a predator capable of targeting massive prey carried obvious risks. Size provided some protection, yet beyond a certain threshold, it also demanded slower reproduction, predictable migration routes, and vast feeding requirements. After Megalodon vanished, the oceans gradually reorganized around a new absence at the top of the food chain. Baleen whales diversified further. Some lineages expanded into colder waters. Others increased dramatically in size over evolutionary time. The blue whale eventually emerged within this transformed marine world, reaching lengths of approximately 33 meters and masses approaching 200 metric tons, larger than any confirmed animal in Earth's history. Its existence may have depended partly on the disappearance of the only predator powerful enough to threaten a fully grown individual consistently. Even today, traces of Megalodon's removal remain embedded in ocean behavior. Large whales migrate through open water without encountering a predator equivalent to the one that once hunted their ancestors. Modern sharks dominate regional ecosystems, yet none occupy the same planetary role Megalodon held across the Miocene seas. The structure of pelagic food chains, the distribution of marine biomass, and the scale achieved by certain whale species all emerged within an ocean adapting to a vacancy at the very top. In this sense, Megalodon's absence is not empty space. It is an active ecological condition. The modern ocean developed under the assumption that the giant predator was gone and would not return. Entire evolutionary pathways unfolded within that new reality. Species expanded into niches previously constrained by predation pressure. Feeding strategies shifted. Migration routes stabilized. Gigantism among baleen whales became more viable in ways that may not have been possible earlier. So the search for Megalodon has never unfolded inside a neutral sea. Every current, migration, corridor, and open water ecosystem existing today belongs to an ocean that has spent millions of years reorganizing itself around the disappearance of its largest hunter. Even in extinction, the animal continues shaping the living world through the silence it left behind, a silence large enough that the structure of the oceans themselves slowly bent around it. The history of the Mariana Trench is not a steady unfolding of knowledge. It is a scattered chain of brief descents into an environment so hostile that every visit feels temporary, almost accidental, as though human technology touches the bottom only for moments before retreating again into safer water. Across more than 6 decades, the total number of meaningful expeditions remains astonishingly small compared with the scale of the trench itself. Each mission illuminated a narrow patch of darkness, and each returned carrying discoveries that altered the scientific picture almost immediately. In January of 1960, the bathyscaphe Trieste descended into Challenger Deep, carrying Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh. The craft moved downward for nearly 5 hours through cold water and complete darkness before settling onto the seafloor. For approximately 20 minutes, they remained there, peering through a small porthole into drifting sediment clouds stirred by their landing. Visibility was poor almost immediately. Yet before the silt thickened completely, they reported observing a flatfish moving across the bottom. The sighting mattered profoundly at the time because it confirmed that vertebrate life could exist under pressures previously considered almost unlivable. No biological specimens were collected. The visit ended quickly, and the trench closed behind them again. For decades afterward, almost nothing returned. Then, in 1995, the Japanese remotely operated vehicle, Kaiko, became the first unmanned craft to reach Challenger Deep successfully. Unlike Trieste, Kaiko carried scientific instruments capable of collecting sediment directly from the trench floor. Inside those samples, researchers identified living bacteria and delicate foraminifera inhabiting the hadal mud. Life at maximum depth was no longer an isolated visual observation through fogged glass. It existed in measurable biological communities, functioning continuously beneath pressures strong enough to compress steel. In 2009, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution deployed the hybrid remotely operated vehicle Nereus. The machine descended to approximately 10,902 meters, collected geological and biological samples, and transmitted imagery of previously undocumented organisms drifting above the sediment. Nereus represented a new generation of deep exploration technology, lighter and more flexible than earlier systems. Yet even these advances remained fragile against the trench itself. During another extreme depth mission in 2014, the vehicle imploded under pressure and vanished into the Pacific darkness it had been built to study. 3 years earlier, in 2012, filmmaker and explorer James Cameron completed a solo descent aboard Deep-Sea Challenger. He spent approximately 7 hours at depth using specialized 3-dimensional camera systems and robotic sampling equipment. To Cameron's eyes, much of the seafloor appeared sparse and visually empty, a broad plain of pale sediment beneath black water. Yet, once the collected samples reached laboratories, they revealed something entirely different. More than 68 previously undocumented species emerged from the sediment itself, organisms invisible during direct observation, but thriving within the trench floor. The 5 Deeps expedition between 2018 and 2019 added another layer to the record. Explorer Victor Vescovo completed repeated dives into Challenger Deep while collecting amphipods, geological samples, and detailed multi-beam sonar data. The resulting maps became the highest resolution trench charts ever produced and exposed geological structures not previously recognized. The expedition also confirmed something more troubling. Even here, in one of the most remote places on Earth, plastic pollution had already arrived. By 2023, baited camera deployments continued returning unfamiliar life forms. Hadal snailfish appeared at record depths exceeding 8,300 meters. New polychaete worms drifted into view. Amphipods crowded bait containers in enormous numbers. Every descent expanded the inventory again. The pattern running through all of these expeditions remains remarkably consistent. None returned empty-handed. Every visit discovered organisms, structures, or behaviors not previously known to science. Not one expedition produced a complete biological catalog of the trench. Not one research team claimed the environment had been fully searched, fully mapped, or fully understood. The Mariana Trench remains less like a solved location and more like a shoreline at the edge of an enormous dark continent, visited briefly, then left behind once more beneath the Pacific. At the bottom of every long scientific question, there comes a moment where speculation must give way to precision. After all the expeditions, fossil records, ecological models, and deep-sea surveys, the conclusion surrounding Megalodon remains remarkably stable in one respect. By every standard method science uses to evaluate extinction, Otodus Megalodon is almost certainly gone from the Earth. The evidence supporting that conclusion is substantial, coherent, and built across multiple independent fields of study, rather than a single isolated observation. The fossil record shows a sharp disappearance approximately 3.6 million years ago. Megalodon teeth cease appearing in sediment layers after that boundary, despite extensive sampling across continental shelves and ancient marine deposits worldwide. The ecological timing also fits. Ocean circulation changed dramatically as the Central American seaway closed. Global cooling intensified. Warm, shallow seas contracted. Whale populations shifted distribution and body structure. New predators emerged, smaller, faster, and more energy efficient than the giant shark that had dominated earlier oceans. The extinction model is not arbitrary. It aligns with known climate transitions and evolutionary pressures in ways paleontologists consider convincing. The physical evidence for survival, meanwhile, remains absent. No verified specimen has ever been recovered from modern oceans. No confirmed tissue, vertebra, tooth, or genetic material has entered scientific analysis from a living individual. No modern whale carcass displays bite marks matching the dimensions expected from a surviving megalodon population. No remotely operated vehicle, baited camera system, hydrophone array, or environmental DNA survey has produced evidence recognized by the scientific community as confirmation. Taken together, these facts create a powerful case. If the question ended there, the verdict would feel absolute. Yet the deep ocean complicates certainty in ways few other environments do. The Mariana Trench and the hadal zone beyond it remain among the least directly observed places on Earth. Human beings have visited these depths fewer than a few hundred times in all recorded history. The overwhelming majority of the trench floor has never been seen by human eyes or camera systems. Comprehensive environmental DNA sampling below 6,000 meters has not been completed. Continuous acoustic monitoring across the trench does not exist. Large portions of the hadal ecosystem remain biologically undocumented even now. This creates an asymmetry in the evidence. Science possesses strong evidence for extinction in the environments it has sampled extensively, particularly shallow marine deposits and continental shelf systems. At the same time, the single environment where survival would be least impossible from a thermal and detection standpoint remains incompletely explored. The absence of evidence from that environment therefore carries a different weight than absence in a well-surveyed terrestrial habitat or coastal ecosystem. This distinction is subtle, yet scientifically important. It does not support belief that Megalodon survives in the Mariana Trench. The probability remains extremely low by any reasonable biological estimate. The caloric demands, reproductive requirements, and evolutionary pressures involved make survival unlikely in the extreme. But unlikely is not identical to disproven through exhaustive search. Those are separate epistemological categories, and careful science depends on maintaining the difference between them. Popular discussions often compress this nuance into cleaner statements than the evidence fully allows. Megalodon is extinct is scientifically responsible shorthand because the evidence overwhelmingly points in that direction. Yet the stronger statement that no descendant lineage of any kind exists anywhere in the hadal Pacific implies a level of direct survey coverage humanity has not achieved. So, the most honest verdict is also the most restrained one. Megalodon is almost certainly extinct. The oceans reorganized around its disappearance millions of years ago, and no confirmed modern evidence contradicts that conclusion. But the Mariana Trench remains one of the only places on Earth where science cannot apply absolute certainty with equal confidence, because the trench itself has never been comprehensively searched. In the deepest water on the planet, a narrow margin of unknown still survives beside everything we believe we understand. Far beneath the movement of weather, shipping lanes, satellites, and human history, the Mariana Trench remains almost exactly as it was before our species existed. Water presses against stone in complete darkness. Sediment drifts downward from distant surface ecosystems. Strange organisms continue their slow lives without witness. And somewhere above that darkness, human civilization speaks confidently about knowing the planet it inhabits. The question of Megalodon survives partly because it rests against that contradiction. It appears at first to be a narrow biological debate concerning one extinct shark, one fossil record, one impossible predator hidden in deep water. Yet the longer the question is examined carefully, the more it begins to reveal something larger and quieter beneath it. The subject is not ultimately the shark itself. The subject is scale, and the uneasy relationship between human knowledge and the immense physical world surrounding it. Modern science has achieved extraordinary things within a remarkably brief span of history. Human beings have mapped the cosmic background radiation left behind by the early universe. We have sequenced genomes, detected gravitational waves crossing space from ancient black hole collisions, and photographed the shadow of an object located approximately 55 million light-years from Earth. Machines travel across the surface of Mars, transmitting images back through interplanetary darkness with astonishing precision. Telescopes study atmospheres around planets orbiting distant stars. And yet, beneath the oceans covering our own world, there are trenches descending approximately 11 kilometers below sea level that remain functionally unexplored. Something clarifying lives inside that fact. The contrast exposes the uneven shape of human attention. As a civilization, we often imagine discovery as a frontier moving steadily outward into space, toward larger distances and more advanced technology. But the Mariana Trench suggests another truth running quietly beside that narrative. Entire landscapes still exist on Earth where direct observation remains rare, fragmented, and temporary. The map feels complete because the surface has been crossed repeatedly. Depth is another matter entirely. The history of science repeatedly reveals this pattern. Every generation eventually reaches a point where its current understanding begins to feel comprehensive. The known world appears increasingly measured, cataloged, and stable. Then new instruments arrive, or new environments become accessible, and reality expands again beyond the boundaries of the previous model. Continents, once considered mythical, become ordinary geography. Microscopic organisms reshape medicine. Deep time alters humanity's understanding of Earth itself. The universe grows older, larger, stranger. The deep ocean stands among the clearest modern reminders that this process has not ended. The Mariana Trench question, therefore, reveals less about hidden sharks than about hidden assumptions. It exposes how often certainty is communicated socially before it is established comprehensively through direct exploration. Science itself understands this distinction well. Careful researchers frame conclusions in probabilities, evidence densities, and margins of uncertainty. Public culture tends to smooth those edges into absolutes, because absolutes feel stable. Yet, the trench resists that instinct. It remains physically present beneath the Pacific as a permanent demonstration that unknown spaces still exist on this planet in meaningful ways. There is also a quieter implication beneath the technological comparisons. Human civilization has devoted vastly greater resources toward exploring distant planets than toward systematically surveying the deepest parts of Earth's oceans. This was not a malicious choice, nor an irrational one. Space offers visibility, symbolism, and technological momentum. The ocean floor offers darkness, pressure, and logistical difficulty, but priorities reveal values. The questions pursued most intensely become reflections of what a civilization chooses to notice. In the end, the Mariana Trench does not merely hold unanswered biological questions. It holds a mirror to the limits of human reach and to the assumptions surrounding those limits. The enduring fascination with Megalodon emerges from that deeper recognition. Somewhere beneath the discussion of fossils, sonar, and extinction timelines rests a simpler awareness, ancient and persistent. The world is still larger than our maps, and there are places on Earth where certainty fades long before the water ends. Across thousands of years of human history, the deep ocean has remained one of the few places on Earth that consistently resists familiarity. Mountains can be climbed, forests can be crossed, deserts eventually yield to roads, satellites, and settlement. But beneath the open sea, depth still creates a boundary that human beings experience less as geography and more as mystery. Every civilization encountering that darkness has projected something of its own fears, beliefs, and uncertainties into it, as though the ocean were not only water and pressure, but a reflective surface turned inward toward the human imagination itself. The ancient Greeks imagined Tartarus as the deepest point beneath existence, farther below the underworld than the heavens stood above the earth. It was a place unreachable, buried beyond ordinary reality, reserved for forces too immense or terrible to remain near the surface world. Centuries later, modern marine science borrowed the word hadal from Hades itself to describe the deepest oceanic zone on the planet. Even now, the language of deep oceanography quietly carries the memory of myth within it. The deepest water remained associated with distance, darkness, and uncertainty long before sonar or submersibles existed. This pattern appears repeatedly across cultures separated by oceans and centuries. Scandinavian sailors described the kraken rising beneath ships. Hebrew texts spoke of Leviathan coiled within primordial waters. Medieval maps placed sea serpents along the blank edges of maritime charts. not merely as decoration, but as an acknowledgement that the unknown still occupied those spaces. The monsters were symbolic, certainly, but they were also practical expressions of incomplete knowledge. Human beings recognized that beneath the surface of the sea existed environments they could not observe directly, and the imagination moved naturally into that absence. In this sense, the impulse to populate the deep ocean with enormous hidden creatures is not simply ignorance overcoming reason. It is the intuitive recognition that uncertainty itself creates narrative space. When evidence ends, imagination continues walking forward into the dark. The ocean encourages this more powerfully than almost any other environment because its concealment is physical and absolute. A forest hides things temporarily. The hadal ocean hides things permanently unless extraordinary technology intervenes. Megalodon occupies this ancient psychological territory with unusual persistence. In popular imagination, it functions less as a literal shark swimming beneath modern ships and more as a symbol of the category of thing the ocean still feels capable of containing: something immense, something ancient, something existing entirely outside the scale of ordinary human life. The fascination survives because the deep Pacific remains one of the only places on Earth where such thoughts still feel structurally possible rather than immediately absurd. And importantly, the ocean has repeatedly justified some portion of that intuition. Again and again, scientific exploration has descended into darkness, expecting emptiness, and returned carrying organisms no one predicted correctly. The coelacanth persisted unseen for millions of years after its apparent disappearance from the fossil record. The megamouth shark existed globally while remaining unknown to science until the late 20th century. Hydrothermal vent ecosystems overturned assumptions about the biological dependence on sunlight itself. Snailfish drift through trenches deeper than most submarines can safely travel. Giant squid, once treated almost as maritime folklore, were photographed alive only recently in human history. Each discovery reinforces the same lesson, gently but persistently. The ocean is not merely a location where unknown organisms occasionally survive. It is an environment whose scale and inaccessibility systematically produce gaps in observation larger than human intuition comfortably handles. The deep sea earns uncertainty honestly, so the trench becomes a mirror as much as a place. Human beings descend toward it, carrying instruments, equations, myths, and expectations, and the darkness returns, all of them altered slightly. What people imagine beneath the deepest water often reveals less about the ocean itself than about the enduring human awareness that the world remains larger than direct knowledge, and that somewhere below the last reach of sunlight, reality continues unfolding whether we witness it or not. At this exact moment, far below storms, coastlines, cities, satellites, and human attention, Challenger Deep remains suspended in conditions almost entirely unchanged from the ancient oceans that first formed it. The water resting against the trench floor is only slightly above freezing, lingering between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius. Pressure presses downward with a force approximately 1,086 times greater than what exists at sea level. Steel bends there, electronics fail there. Human beings survive there, only briefly inside engineered shells surrounded by crushing darkness. No sunlight has ever reached the trench floor, not once in the history of the Earth. Above the trench, daylight crosses the Pacific in shifting patterns. Clouds move, aircraft pass overhead, seasons drift across continents. Entire civilizations rise and disappear within the span of geological moments. none of it reaches the hadal plane below. The deepest water exists beyond the atmosphere of weather and beyond the biological rhythm of sunrise and sunset. Darkness there is not nightly. It is permanent, uninterrupted across millions of years. And through that darkness, marine snow continues falling. Tiny particles descend continuously from the upper ocean, fragments of plankton, fecal pellets, drifting microbial matter, scales, tissue, and microscopic remains from creatures that lived briefly in sunlight before beginning a final descent through nearly 11 kilometers of water. The process never stops. Day after day, century after century, the surface world sheds itself slowly into the abyss. Most particles are consumed before reaching the bottom. Some continue downward for weeks until they settle softly into hadal sediment, already layered with the remains of vanished oceans. The trench receives all of it silently. Somewhere across that sediment tonight, amphipods move in slow swarms invisible to any observer. Sea cucumbers graze methodically through the drifting organic dust. Snailfish navigate black water using pressure sensitivity rather than vision. Bacteria continue metabolic exchanges around chemical traces buried within the mud. Life persists there without spectacle, detached almost entirely from human awareness. Whatever else may or may not exist at those depths moves within the same ancient darkness. It does not know human beings debate it. It does not know species, names, extinction models, sonar surveys, or myths. The trench itself remains indifferent to every question projected downward into it. Curiosity belongs to the surface world. The abyss simply continues. There is something quietly disorienting in recognizing how old this environment truly is. The Mariana Trench predates human civilization by incomprehensible spans of time. It predates written language, agriculture, cities, and memory itself. Long before mammals emerged on land, tectonic plates were already descending beneath one another in the western Pacific, shaping the first contours of the hadal world. Dinosaurs appeared and vanished while darkness continued resting against the trench floor unchanged. Entire mountain ranges rose and eroded away, while marine snow continued drifting downward through cold black water. And when humanity finally arrived, our contact with the trench occupied only scattered instants. The weighted ropes lowered from HMS Challenger in the 19th century, the descent of Trieste, the robotic vehicles carrying cameras and sampling arms, the brief illumination of submersible lights against pale sediment, all of it together forms only a tiny interruption measured against geological time. In the scale the trench itself inhabits, every expedition humanity has ever conducted amounts to something shorter than a breath held briefly before silence returns again. Even now, after decades of technology and exploration, most of the Mariana Trench remains unseen directly by human eyes. Vast sections of its floor continue exactly as they were before the first ship crossed the Pacific. Water presses downward, sediment accumulates grain by grain. Organisms adapted to pressure and darkness continue their slow existence beyond observation. The trench waits for nothing. It does not conceal itself intentionally, nor reveal itself generously. It simply exists at a depth where human presence becomes temporary and fragile. And, somewhere beneath nearly 11 kilometers of black Pacific water tonight, the oldest darkness on Earth continues undisturbed, holding its silence around whatever still moves there. Inside the pressure sphere of a deep submersible, there comes a point during descent when the surface stops feeling physically connected to the world below. The water outside thickens into darkness. Instrument lights replace horizon and sky, and every meter downward increases the weight pressing against the hull. Researchers who have traveled into the hadal zone often describe an awareness that the ocean above them is no longer abstract distance, but mass, an entire vertical planet of cold water extending upward for kilometers beyond visibility. The gauges become the only confirmation that another world still exists overhead. And beneath that weight, silence changes character. Surface silence is rarely complete. Wind moves through it. Buildings hum. Insects vibrate invisibly within it. Even isolated deserts carry traces of atmosphere shifting across stone. The hadal zone holds a different condition entirely, one shaped by pressure, darkness, and separation from weather itself. Sound travels through seawater with strange clarity, yet the trench floor remains suspended inside an immense stillness, broken only by distant geological murmurs, faint mechanical noise from exploration vehicles, and the quiet movement of organisms adapted to conditions that human senses were never designed to inhabit. The people who descend there do not usually return speaking about monsters. They return speaking about scale. Again and again, expeditions have lowered cameras into places expected to be sparse and discovered dense biological systems instead. Sediment once assumed lifeless has returned containing active microbial communities. Baited cameras, lowered into darkness, have recorded species never previously documented. Samples recovered from trench environments have altered assumptions about pressure tolerance, metabolism, reproduction, and the boundaries within which life can persist. The hadal zone has developed a reputation among its researchers not as a place that confirms certainty, but as a place that steadily weakens overconfidence. What the trench gives back to science is therefore not simple resolution. It gives sharper edges to uncertainty. It reveals where observation ends and inference begins. Every successful expedition illuminates only a tiny fraction of an environment so vast and inaccessible that conclusions about it must remain carefully proportional to the evidence actually gathered there. The researchers who dedicate their careers to studying the hadal world are not people secretly convinced that Megalodon waits somewhere below 6,000 meters. Most accept the extinction evidence exactly as the broader scientific community does. The fossil record is persuasive. The ecological conditions that once sustained Megalodon changed profoundly millions of years ago. No confirmed specimen, tissue sample, environmental DNA trace, or verified modern feeding mark supports survival. Yet many of the same researchers speak carefully when discussing certainty itself. That caution does not emerge from belief in hidden giants. It emerges from repeated experience with a region of Earth that refuses to behave like a finished map. The trench has introduced new species unexpectedly, revealed ecosystems no one predicted, and demonstrated again and again that absence of observation in the deep ocean often reflects absence of access more than absence of life. Scientists who work there professionally learn to distinguish between improbability and impossibility, between unsupported claims and unsupported certainty. Megalodon almost certainly vanished approximately 3.6 million years ago. The balance of evidence strongly supports that conclusion. The modern ocean almost certainly does not contain a surviving population of giant prehistoric sharks moving through the abyss below human notice. And still, the Mariana Trench remains one of the few places on Earth that has earned the right to resist absolute language. Not because extraordinary claims become true there, but because the trench itself has demonstrated patiently and repeatedly, that the boundary between known and unknown remains real. Beneath nearly 11 kilometers of water exists an environment visited only briefly, sampled only partially, and understood only in fragments gathered across scattered descents, separated by years. Every journey downward returns carrying specimens, measurements, footage, and data, but also something quieter, an altered sense of proportion. The trench reminds us that knowledge is not the same thing as total visibility. It reminds us that even now, on a mapped planet orbiting inside an age of satellites and planetary probes, there are still places where human certainty fades gradually into darkness, pressure, distance, and unanswered depth. There are places on Earth where human presence still feels temporary. The Mariana Trench is one of them. Aircraft cross the sky above it every day. Satellites pass overhead in silence. Cargo ships move across the Pacific, carrying millions of tons of machinery and fuel. Yet, beneath all of that movement, the trench remains largely untouched, descending almost 11 kilometers into conditions more hostile than the surface of many worlds we dream of visiting. It is the closest thing modern civilization has to a true frontier, not because it is unreachable, but because we have barely chosen to reach into it. The imbalance becomes visible when measured in attention. In 2024, NASA operated with a budget of approximately $25.4 billion. NOAA's entire ocean exploration budget remained near $42 million, a fraction so small it almost disappears beside the scale of the domain it is expected to study. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface. Its average depth extends approximately 3,688 meters downward into pressure, darkness, and geological complexity. Yet, as a civilization, we invest vastly more resources studying distant planets than the largest environment on the planet beneath our feet. This is not an argument against space exploration. The telescopes, probes, and orbital instruments of modern astronomy have transformed humanity's understanding of the universe. But the comparison reveals something unusual about the relationship between human curiosity and human proximity. We can image black holes tens of millions of light years away with greater confidence than we can describe the ecosystems operating in many regions of our own abyssal and hadal seafloor. And every serious descent into those depths keeps returning with evidence that the scientific rewards are enormous. Deep ocean expeditions repeatedly uncover species unknown to biology, organisms carrying biochemical adaptations unlike anything previously documented. Enzymes evolved under crushing pressure and near freezing temperatures have already informed pharmaceutical research, industrial chemistry, and studies of cellular stability. Hydrothermal vent communities transformed biology itself by demonstrating that ecosystems can operate independently of sunlight, sustained entirely through chemosynthesis. Microbial extremophiles discovered in trench sediments continue reshaping assumptions about the limits of life, metabolism, and survivability. The deep ocean does not merely add details to existing science. Again and again, it alters foundational models. Yet the frontier remains thinly explored. At the same time, scientific access struggles for funding. Industrial interest has accelerated. The International Seabed Authority has issued hundreds of exploration licenses connected to deep-sea mineral extraction. Across multiple ocean basins, corporations and governments are examining polymetallic nodules, cobalt-rich crusts, and rare earth deposits scattered across abyssal plains and seamount systems. Machines capable of disturbing seafloor sediment on massive scales are being designed for environments whose ecological relationships remain only partially understood. There is a strange possibility resting quietly inside that sequence of events. Human civilization may significantly alter hadal and abyssal ecosystems before completing even a basic inventory of what lives there. Species may disappear before they are formally described. Biological relationships, millions of years old, may be interrupted before their mechanisms are understood. Entire branches of evolutionary adaptation may vanish into sediment clouds, raised by industrial extraction in places where scientific cameras have barely lingered long enough to observe a single feeding cycle. The unresolved question surrounding Megalodon sits inside that larger reality. Whether the animal survives is almost certainly answered already by extinction. But the broader lesson carried by the trench remains active and immediate. The deepest parts of Earth are not empty spaces waiting passively beneath us. They are living systems operating largely beyond observation, shaped by evolutionary pressures older than humanity itself. The last genuine frontier on Earth is not hidden on another planet. It lies beneath the Pacific, beneath darkness and pressure and drifting marine snow, still holding ecosystems. Science has not fully cataloged and biological strategies not yet understood. And the race now unfolding is no longer simply about discovery. It is about whether knowledge arrives before alteration does. Maps create a dangerous illusion. Once coastlines are drawn and names are assigned, the human mind begins treating absence of detail as absence itself. Blank spaces feel temporary, unfinished only in a technical sense, as though the remaining uncertainty has already been reduced to a formality awaiting confirmation. The Mariana Trench resists that instinct. Even now, after decades of expeditions and increasingly advanced instruments, the deepest parts of the Pacific remain outlined more by fragments than by completion. There is an honest inventory of what remains unresolved there, and it is longer than most people realize. The complete biological inventory of the Mariana Trench has not been finished. Every major expedition returning from hadal depth continues adding species not previously documented in the scientific record. Some are microscopic extremophiles embedded within sediment grains. Others are visible animals moving across the trench floor, organisms large enough to appear clearly on camera, yet unknown before the moment of encounter. The pattern has repeated often enough that discovery is no longer treated as surprising by trench researchers. It is expected. The water column itself remains only partially sampled. Comprehensive environmental DNA analysis across the full hadal depth range has not been conducted along the trench's entire 2,550-kilometer length. Environmental DNA allows scientists to detect traces of organisms through genetic material suspended invisibly in seawater, skin cells, waste particles, mucus, reproductive material. In shallow marine systems, it has revealed species distributions previously missed by direct observation. In the hadal zone, systematic coverage at that scale does not yet exist. The sediment record below the trench floor also remains incomplete. Core samples have been collected from specific locations, but the full fossil history preserved across the Mariana system has never been comprehensively examined for the intervals surrounding Megalodon's extinction. Vast stretches of hadal sediment remain uncored, unexamined, and physically untouched by human sampling equipment. The geological archive exists beneath kilometers of water and layers of compressed deposition, but much of it remains unread. Then there are the manganese-encrusted teeth recovered from Pacific sediments, the anomalous specimens whose accretion patterns generated debate extending into modern literature. The challenge to their dating methods was substantial and scientifically reasonable, yet the anomaly itself was never fully dissolved into consensus. Updated analyses continued producing irregular timelines inconsistent with the standard extinction framework. The discussion narrowed, fragmented, and faded from public attention, but it did not arrive at complete resolution. Sound remains another unfinished map. The hadal zone does not possess a fully cataloged acoustic profile. Hydrophones deployed across the deep Pacific continue recording biological, geological, and unexplained acoustic events within an environment where sound travels immense distances through cold, dense water. Some recordings eventually receive identification years later, as happened with the bioduck signal traced to Antarctic minke whales. Others remain less certain. The deep ocean still contains noises disconnected from confidently identified sources, not necessarily mysterious in origin, but unresolved in documentation. Even the hunting behavior of sperm whales leaves gaps behind it. These animals descend routinely beyond 2,000 meters into darkness, carrying some of the most specialized diving physiology on Earth. Their stomach contents have repeatedly introduced science to species rarely or never observed directly. Entire branches of deep ocean life have first become visible through remains retrieved from within whale digestive systems. What all of their prey species are, distributed across global oceans and extreme depths, remains incompletely cataloged. None of these gaps function as evidence that Megalodon survived. The distinction matters. Absence of complete knowledge is not confirmation of extraordinary claims. The trench does not justify fantasy, and uncertainty alone cannot resurrect an extinct predator from the fossil record. But uncertainty still exists. That is the quieter truth resting beneath all the arguments and counter-arguments. There are regions of the map where the scientifically honest answer remains incomplete, where the appropriate conclusion is not a definitive no, but a measured acknowledgement that observation has not yet reached full coverage. The Mariana Trench continues to hold those spaces open, not as proof of hidden monsters, but as reminders that even now the deepest parts of Earth remain only partially illuminated. Far out in the western Pacific, beyond shipping lanes and weather systems and the illuminated grids of coastal cities, the Mariana Trench continues descending into darkness no human being has ever fully crossed with sight. Instruments have touched parts of it. Cameras have drifted briefly through portions of its water column. Small pools of light from submersibles have swept over fragments of sediment before rising again toward the surface. Yet the overwhelming majority of that environment remains physically unobserved, existing beyond the reach of complete inspection in the present moment of human history. There's a particular feeling attached to that reality. Most questions encountered in modern life arrive already surrounded by answers. Search engines resolve them instantly. Databases contain them. Satellites monitor them continuously. Even distant galaxies now appear in extraordinary detail through instruments capable of assembling faint light that traveled millions of years across space before reaching Earth. Human civilization has grown accustomed to rapid illumination, to the assumption that uncertainty is temporary, and that every unknown simply waits for a sufficiently advanced device. The trench offers a different experience. Here, the limitation is not lack of intelligence or lack of interest. It is scale, pressure, distance, cost, darkness, and access. The unknown persists, not because humanity has ignored it entirely, but because the environment itself remains genuinely difficult to enter and extraordinarily difficult to survey comprehensively. Somewhere beneath nearly 11 kilometers of water Exists terrain we know is real, ecosystems we know are active, and biological interactions we know are occurring continuously without observation. The Megalodon question rests inside that larger condition. Not because evidence strongly supports survival. It does not. The fossil record still points overwhelmingly toward extinction millions of years ago. But the structure of the question itself contains something rare in the modern world. It concerns a real animal that unquestionably existed inside a real environment that remains incompletely explored, using limitations and knowledge that are themselves scientifically documented rather than imaginary. The uncertainty surrounding the trench is authentic. The incomplete map is authentic. The unanswered portions are authentic. And there is value in that authenticity. Human beings have always been shaped partly by the presence of horizons beyond immediate understanding. Ancient navigators crossed oceans without knowing what coastlines existed ahead. Early astronomers studied wandering lights in the sky without knowing they were worlds. Naturalists entered forests and reefs and polar regions carrying incomplete maps and returning with species no one had imagined before the moment of encounter. Discovery is not merely the accumulation of answers. It is also the preservation of places where curiosity remains proportionate to reality. The Mariana Trench still holds that proportion. Standing at the edge of a genuine unknown changes the texture of thought. It restores scale. It interrupts the comforting illusion that the planet has already been fully translated into data and coordinates and finished inventories. The trench reminds us that Earth is still larger than our continuous observation of it, that there are environments operating right now beyond sustained human visibility, shaped by pressures and ecologies only partially understood. There is something unexpectedly generous in that condition. A world with no remaining mysteries would become smaller than the imagination that evolved inside it. Every answered question would narrow the horizon slightly further until curiosity itself became procedural rather than exploratory. But the trench still resists complete reduction. It still contains silence deep enough to hide unanswered things within it, not necessarily monsters or impossible survivors, but uncertainty itself, real and measurable and enduring. We are fortunate to exist during a period when such places remain, fortunate that the map has not entirely closed, fortunate that somewhere on Earth there are still depths where knowledge fades gradually into darkness instead of ending cleanly at certainty. The Mariana Trench offers that rare sensation still, the feeling of looking outward from the illuminated edge of the known world towards something vast enough to remain partially unseen. Far beneath the illuminated surface of the Pacific, below storms, shipping routes, migrating whales, drifting satellites, and the entire visible machinery of human civilization, the trench continues exactly as it always has. At approximately 10,935 meters beneath the waves, cold water presses against sediment that has not seen sunlight in the history of the Earth. Fine particles descend continuously from the distant world above, the slow and unbroken fall of marine snow carrying the remains of surface life downward through darkness, measured not in hours, but in kilometers. The descent never truly stops there. Amphipods move through the sediment in patient clusters, feeding within a landscape shaped by pressure beyond ordinary comprehension. Snailfish drift carefully through water dense enough to alter the structure of their own bodies, navigating without sight through sensory systems tuned to tiny disturbances, moving invisibly across the hadal currents. Bacteria continue metabolizing within the mud itself, sustaining chemical cycles older than humanity, older than mammals, older than the continents in their present arrangement. The The trench remains active every moment, though almost no one sees it directly. And somewhere within all of that darkness rests the unanswered portion of the question. Not necessarily the survival of Megalodon itself. The balance of evidence still leans overwhelmingly toward extinction. Millions of years have passed since the last confirmed appearance of its teeth in the fossil record. Entire ocean systems reorganized after its disappearance. The surface world moved forward without it. Whale populations changed. Predators diversified. The sea adapted to its absence so thoroughly that the modern ocean now feels complete without the creature that once dominated it. Yet completeness is not the same thing as total visibility. Whether Megalodon vanished entirely, whether some distant descendant lineage altered itself beyond recognition in the deep, or whether the trench simply contains other unknown forms unrelated to the question entirely. The Mariana Trench offers no direct answer. It does not confirm. It does not deny. It simply continues existing beneath the reach of comprehensive observation, carrying on through geological time without obligation to resolve human curiosity. There is something strangely calming in that indifference. The ocean does not conceal its secrets intentionally. It is not withholding knowledge out of hostility or malice. The hidden quality of the deep sea emerges naturally from scale itself. The Pacific is immense, beyond ordinary intuition. The trench cuts downward through water colder than polar winters, under pressures capable of collapsing most human machinery, across distances so large that complete exploration becomes a matter not only of science, but of economics, engineering, politics, and time. The secrets remain because our reach remains incomplete. Human civilization often speaks about discovery as though unanswered questions are temporary flaws waiting to be corrected by enough technology. But some answers exist inside environments that operate according to slower clocks than our own. The trench formed over tens of millions of years. Its sediment accumulated grain by grain across epochs longer than human language has existed. Creatures adapted there through evolutionary pressures, unfolding so gradually that entire species emerged and disappeared before the first stone tools were shaped on land above. Against that scale, human exploration remains very young. Every descent into the hadal zone still resembles a brief interruption more than a permanent presence. Lights arrive. Instruments gather measurements. Cameras sweep across fragments of seafloor. Then the vehicles rise again, leaving the darkness to close quietly behind them. The trench resumes its patient rhythms exactly as before. And whatever answer ultimately exists regarding Megalodon, whether extinction absolute or survival impossible or some subtler truth hidden within evolutionary history, that answer is not moving anywhere quickly. It rests somewhere within cold water, fossil sediment, genetic traces, ecological patterns, or pressures beyond present reach. It has already waited approximately 3.6 million years without urgency. It can remain there a little longer. Tonight, somewhere beneath the Pacific, the Mariana Trench continues in total darkness. The temperature remains just above freezing. The pressure rests at approximately 1,086 times greater than the pressure at the surface. Sediment shifts slowly along the trench floor, while marine snow descends through nearly 11 kilometers of black water, carrying the remains of the upper ocean downward grain by grain, hour after hour, century after century. Nothing there pauses for us. The trench does not care that human beings have given it names. It does not care about the arguments surrounding extinction, survival, probability, or myth. Whatever exists at Challenger Deep tonight exists entirely on its own terms, moving through darkness older than civilization itself. The amphipods continue feeding through the sediment. Snailfish drift carefully through water dense enough to deform unprotected machinery. Microbial life metabolizes inside cracks and mineral layers that formed long before the first human story was ever spoken aloud beside a fire. And somewhere within that immense silence rests the reason the question has endured for so long. Not necessarily because Megalodon survives. The scientific evidence still points overwhelmingly toward extinction. The fossil record ends approximately 3.6 million years ago. No confirmed specimen has surfaced in modern waters. No verified biological trace has been recovered from the hadal zone. The modern ocean appears to function without the presence of the ancient predator that once dominated it. But certainty feels different in a place we have barely entered. Humanity has mapped the surfaces of distant planets with greater resolution than large portions of its own seafloor. We have photographed galaxies tens of millions of light years away while leaving vast sections of the deep Pacific observed only in fragments. We have lowered cameras into the trench for scattered hours across decades and called the resulting picture sufficient to close one of the largest biological questions the ocean can still hold. Perhaps it is sufficient. Perhaps the silence truly is only silence. Perhaps the fossil evidence is complete enough, the ecological reasoning strong enough, and the absence of direct observation meaningful enough that the simplest explanation remains entirely correct. The ocean may simply be empty of the creature that once ruled it, leaving only pressure, sediment, and darkness behind. Yet the trench keeps complicating certainty through its own history. Again and again, every descent has returned with organisms not previously documented, behaviors not predicted, ecosystems not fully anticipated. The coelacanth survived unnoticed into the modern era. The megamouth shark remained hidden until the 1970s. Hydrothermal vent ecosystems rewrote assumptions about how life sustains itself. The deepest fish ever recorded was filmed only recently, moving calmly through water once assumed too extreme for vertebrate life entirely. The trench earns caution from anyone speaking about what cannot exist within it. Maybe the room truly is empty, or maybe the room simply has no windows. Far below the shipping lanes and satellite signals, below storms and sunlight, and every familiar surface rhythm of the human world, the water remains still tonight. Marine snow continues its endless descent through cold layers of black water toward a seafloor fewer human beings have directly visited than have walked upon the moon. Whatever answer ultimately exists there, whether ordinary or extraordinary, biological or geological, extinct or surviving only in fossil memory, it remains patient inside a world operating according to timescales far older than ours. And perhaps that patience is part of what keeps drawing us back. If this journey kept you company tonight, a like and a subscribe help this channel continue exploring the quiet edges of the known world. Leave a comment and share where on earth you are listening from as the ocean drifts silently below us all. Good night.